I call Louisa Wall.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. I too want to pay my respects to you and the communities in Whanganui who have been devastated by the floods, and send our aroha from right across Aotearoa, actually. Some of the images have been quite distressing, so I acknowledge that you've had to deal with that at this time. It's my pleasure to speak on the Local Government Auckland Council Amendment Bill. I would like to acknowledge the Honourable Maggie Barry, whose bill this initially was, and that has now been transferred to Alfred Ngaro. And it seems to me, really, there are three main issues or problems that this piece of legislation is trying to correct or fix. The first of such is about conflict of interest. And so the proposition is that if you serve on multiple bills, then you've got a conflict of interest because supposedly the communities that you're serving may have different needs, and so you're pulled in all these sorts of directions because you can't reconcile the priorities of those two communities. I just want to put on record, a conflict of interest is actually, and I quote, a situation in which a person is in a position to derive personal benefit from actions or decisions made in their official capacity. So whether or not you're torn in a whole lot of different parts, which actually we are, a number of times in this House, because we end up debating and discussing particular pieces of legislation that some members of our community support, others don't, and I guess you have to use your judgment in determining where you sit on that spectrum. So, you know, dealing with conflict of interest actually is an inherent responsibility and role as a Member of Parliament. The second issue that this bill seeks to rectify, actually, and I'll quote Minister Barry from a press release that I have seen, and it says, this has allowed local board power to be concentrated in the hands of a few people, many of whom don't even live in the area they represent. So I guess a fundamental question that this piece of legislation is proposing is, should you live in the area you represent? An interesting proposition, because I'm sure that there are a number of members of Parliament who actually don't physically live in the electorate they represent for a number of reasons. I'm sure my former colleague Lynn Pillay won't mind, but she did live in the Waitakere electorate. But the boundaries change after the census, and so sometimes people don't actually end up living in their electorate, but they have a huge relationship, commitment, history, but that seems to be one of the issues that this piece of legislation is trying to deal with. And I guess the third, which I find really fascinating, is this whole issue about double dipping. And so if you are a member of one local board and another local board, you collect two salaries because you represent that local board and that local board, that somehow there's a problem with it. What I want to highlight actually is an Auckland Council document dated the 13th of May 2013, and it's titled Becoming an Elected Member Booklet. And the interesting thing about this booklet, Mr Speaker, is that it anticipates how much commitment that a member of the local board should anticipate giving per week. So if you're a chair, they say that you will end up working 40 hours a week. And if you're a local board member, you should anticipate working between 15 and 25 hours a week. So if you serve on two local boards and you're anticipated to work between 15 and 25 hours a week, actually, that's between 30 and 50 hours per week. Actually, is that unmanageable, I guess, as a concept? Is that type of workload unmanageable? Because actually what this bill says is that 5(2)(c) must not serve as a member on two or more local boards at the same time. Well, what about being a chair? It doesn't mention anything about not being a chair. And the reason I bring it up is actually I think having that responsibility of a 40-hour-a-week position actually might challenge your ability to do a good job if you're on two different boards. But actually, if you're a member of a local board on two local boards, is working between 30 and 15 hours actually an unmanageable workload? So that's my short contribution to the speech, this debate, Mr Speaker. I will reiterate we are supporting this to Select Committee, and I look forward to reading the Select Committee report on this piece of legislation, actually, and whether or not this is sufficient, because maybe there will be some other supplementary order papers that the Select Committee recommend. Kia ora.
Kia ora.